Parents wanting to look after their own children, that is the topic of tonight's byline. It should hardly be shocking that parents want to look after their own children. When given the option, most people say, yeah, they want to stay home with their kids. But the political left, the progressives in this country, supported by their allies and the media and funded by the labor movement, well, they've been on a 30-year campaign to convince us that we not only need, but also want a national daycare system paid for by taxpayers. But in the latest release on Canadian attitudes towards childcare from the Institute of Marriage and Family Canada, well, their poll shows that a strong majority of Canadians, regardless of education level, believe that the best thing for children is for a parent to stay at home and care for their child. They choose this over having a professional look after the child. In total, 76% of Canadians believe that this is the best. Broken down by education level, it goes from a high of 80% for those with some university education to a low of 62% for people with postgraduate degrees. Now, my absolutely flippant comment on that last factoid is, well, there you go. More education rots your brain, so you think a professional's better to look after your kid than you are. But that's just a flippant comment. The fact is, even at that low level, 62% is a strong majority. No government in Canada has 62% of the vote or anywhere close to it. So what does the media do with this? Well, some outlets are being mischievous with their headlines. Stay-at-home parenting loses appeal among highly educated. That's what Post Media went with. What could that headline lead you to believe? That smart people don't like to stay at home with their kids, therefore smart people like daycare. It's accurate, yet misleading, all at the same time. The media party have long loved national daycare. They don't much like the idea of mums and dads looking after their own kids. I mean, there's no government spending in that, no federal provincial bickering, no story for them to cover. Unless something bad happens at home, and then they can call for some other national program. Time and again, parents have said what they want. They prefer a parent to stay at home. And time and again, progressive politicians, union leaders, and the media have made the case for more government spending. In today's Toronto Red Star, there's a column co-written by Alex and Jordan Himmelfarb. Jordan Himmelfarb is the opinion page editor for the Star. Alex Himmelfarb is dad. He's a former clerk of the Privy Council who served under Paul Martin. That means the media party loves Alex Himmelfarb because he's an old-fashioned big government guy. So it's not surprising that in today's Red Star, they're pimping for a national daycare program as part of their call for higher taxes and more government spending. I'm sure it'll be a feature of their books. Tax is not a four-letter word. The Himmelfarbs argue that people, like those who want lower taxes, we've won the war because no one's talking about raising taxes higher and the services that those bring. I only wish. Perhaps Himmelfarb has missed out on the statements made by fellow Red Star writer Linda McQuaig on saying she wants higher tax rates, much higher, personal tax rates of 70% or more. McQuaig is also an advocate of a national daycare program, writing in the Star that, quote, a government childcare program like the ones common in Europe and Quebec is the only way to provide millions of Canadian parents access to decent childcare. McQuaig is running to be the New Democrat MP for Toronto Centre. Her whole party backs national daycare. McQuaig will battle it out for that seat against Justin Trudeau's hand-picked candidate, Chrystia Freeland, another media party type that supports government-funded and run daycare, just like the Liberal Party as a whole. In fact, of all the major parties in Parliament and the non-parties that the media pays attention to, like the Greens and the Bloc, all of them except for the Conservatives push for a national daycare program, one that rewards parents for using daycare, gives nothing to stay-at-home parents. So we have yet another poll showing most parents would rather they stay at home with their own kids. Lots of literature shows that this is good for the children and the long-term development of them, but still the media, the progressive politicians, they push and push and push to take society in the opposite direction. We can't deny that there are some people that need help, the least fortunate in our society. But is building a big, expensive, one-size-fits-all system the way to go? No. I'd say the way to go is to listen to the parents. And that's the byline.
But Canadians have always accepted a relatively higher level of taxation to fund the valued public goods and services, because we've always believed in the importance of the public good, to reduce inequality and mitigate its impacts, and collectively to build the future to the extent that we can. That's always been the Canadian way.
Like most progressives, history for Alex Himmelfarb apparently starts in 1967, because for most of Canada's history, we actually had lower tax rates than the United States. But look, he was on taxpayer-funded TV Ontario when he was saying that, so take that for what it's worth. But let's turn to the people behind the poll. Andrea Mrozek is with the Institute for Marriage and Family. She heads it up. And Andrea, this is the latest slice. This was one big poll you did, but you've been looking at it in different slices. Today's is all about education levels. Were you surprised to find out that postgraduate, much more likely to, but still a majority, but more likely to say they'd prefer a professional look after their kids?
Not altogether surprising. You're right, we've been looking at this daycare poll in 3 slices. The breakout, we had the general results showing 76% of parents would prefer to stay home with their children under 6. And then we looked at Quebec, which had some interesting results, and finally the education levels. I didn't find it surprising. We did make a big effort to ask Canadians balancing work and family. We talked to as many as we could. It
was a significant poll. We're talking more than 2,000 people. It wasn't a couple hundred, just clicking yes or no.
Yeah, it was 2,000 across the country. This is statistically significant data we're looking at. For the educated parents, we still see the majority thinking that the best place for a child under 6 is at home with a parent, but we see some differences in the majority level there.
That's got to be hopeful for you, though, because you do not advocate for a national daycare program. 62% to 80%, regardless of education level. That's a strong majority of that many Canadians saying, no, I think we'd be better placed to handle this at home.
Yeah, I think there's so much diversity, and when you ask Canadians about what their childcare choices are, there is no cut and dry, one-size-fits-all solution that would suit everybody. We all know that when we look at the Quebec daycare system, that it's actually more accessed by people of higher income and not the people who you might hope that it actually could serve. We do have that example. We don't hear about it very often, but research has shown that. We also have other studies from Quebec on daycare programs when they show some of the adverse effects that nobody ever hears about include mental health drawbacks for the mothers in particular. But look, we're not here to talk about the type of care. It's simply to say, look, parents say they would like to be at home for children under 6, and public policy right now does not remotely reflect that.
So let's look at what parents want if they can't have a child at home, because this is telling. Because everyone always, the advocates of a national daycare program say, well, not everyone can have that. They're not all rich like you, to which I laugh. And they say, we've got to have this. Well, only 12% support what the daycare advocates want, which is not-for-profit care. They don't like profit care. They don't like the neighborhood home care. 51% say they'd prefer a relative. 23% neighborhood home daycare. 12% for-profit, 7%. 12% not-for-profit, 7% for-profit. What does that tell you? What do these stats say?
Well, it's a repetition of what we saw before, is that when people can't stay home with their own kids, they prefer an environment that looks the most like the home environment. But if I could briefly comment, I would say also that nobody is really discussing a national daycare plan anymore. And the reason why we know this is because the advocates themselves aren't talking it up as much. The whole thing has gone provincial. So here in Ontario, where I live, you see them talking about putting daycare into the public school system. There is no evidence from this poll, at least, that would be something that parents would prefer or Canadians would prefer on the funding options and the type of care. There is no real reason to move to putting daycares into public schools. We specifically asked Canadians about that as a funding option as well.
And they didn't like it. Now, I'm continually told by people with zero experience in Quebec and the Quebec daycare system that everyone loves it. And it's great, but you asked Quebecers specifically, and this was your summer release, and 70% of parents in Quebec say they would prefer a parent to stay at home. 26% then said a competent caregiver. 4% said they didn't know. I think that's pretty telling.
Yeah, and the other interesting Quebec result was that for across the entire country, the highest percentage came from Quebec. For government funding. If governments should support parents in childcare options, the highest percentage, 45% of Quebecers said that money should go to parents directly, which is actually the opposite of the system that they have. So it's something, again, that's just an interesting response from part two, the Quebec portion of the daycare poll.
All right, Andrea, thanks for coming in. We'll chat again soon, I'm sure. I want to leave you with this. It is, well, a little tidbit. We're going to be talking about kids and obesity in a moment. I found this while researching today. CBC News story. The nutrition and physical activity levels of children who are in daycare needs to be investigated, recommended Quebec researchers who report higher levels of obesity in children being cared for outside the home. That from a CBC News story just last November. Email me your thoughts on this ongoing battle, byline@sunmedia.ca.